I'm Kim Ironman from EcoBeneficial, and I'm here to bring you some more great information on useful gardening tips to improve our environment. I have the wonderful pleasure today of interviewing the masterful Doug Tallamy. Dr. Tallamy is a professor at the University of Delaware. He's an entomologist with particular expertise in Lepidoptera, that is butterflies, skippers, and moths, and he's also a behavioral ecologist. Doug is the noted author of what I view as a seminal book on ecology and gardening called Bringing Nature Home. So Doug, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this today.
Well, it's a pleasure.
So I'd like to ask you first about your first book, Bringing Nature Home. I know you have another one that's coming out soon. What brought you to write this particular book?
It was all serendipity. My wife and I moved to this property. It had been mowed for hay originally, but before we moved in it was taken out of mowing for 3 years. And when you mow for hay around here, you're really mowing autumn olive and Japanese honeysuckle and oriental bittersweet and all the invasives that are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So of course they came back like crazy. And you couldn't walk around this property. It was like Sleeping Beauty's castle. And I cut paths just before we started to clear it out. I'm always looking for insects. I walk along these paths. And I notice with this distinction between the natives and the non-natives right next to each other that none of the insects were on the non-natives, the oriental bittersweet, the autumn olive. But the black cherry and the oak and the walnut had typical insect loads. So I thought that'd be a good project for an undergraduate to study. And that actually led to talking about this. It led to grants to support the research. I discovered the public was interested, and the public said, let us read something, and I said, well, I don't have anything for you to read. And then I said, well, I'll write a pamphlet, and the pamphlet became a book, and that's how it happened.
And that was in 2006 or 7? When did your book come out?
The book came out in November 2007, so almost 2008.
Okay. Yeah. And had you done any gardening to speak of before this all came about?
We consider this property restoration. So it started with nothing, and everything you see here has been put in by us or the little creatures that help us. And it all happened within 13 years, so it happens pretty quickly. So sure, it's gardening, but most people picture gardens as distinct little flower beds and they work on it. We're talking about the entire landscape here, and we're trying to restore ecological function. So step 1 was getting rid of the non-natives, and step 2 was putting something in their place. And unfortunately, step 1 is, that's forever.
Not that much fun.
Well, they keep coming in. They keep coming in. So you have to monitor it all the time. And I want to give a plug for my wife because she has done most of this. She's out there all the time.
Pulling invasives.
Pulling invasives. She will say, oh, the place is a disaster, but you should have seen it before she got going. So it does work. And then the fun part is to see all the animal life that comes back to use these plants.
So the home that you lived in prior to this, did you have a garden per se? What was that house like?
That house was classic suburbia. We had lawn like everybody else. We put a row of reddos or dogwoods along the street front to try to give us a little bit of privacy. And when we went to sell the house, the real estate agent said, you have to rip that out. You have to create some curb appeal.
Oh dear.
In other words, you've got to be able to see the house from
right.
all directions,
right.
or it's not typical. And but no, we really didn't. We were busy with our other lives, and it wasn't until we moved here and discovered the extent to which the non-natives have really taken over any natural area. And the consequences of that. It was moving here that helped me discover that. So when we lived in Westchester, Pennsylvania, just wasn't into that yet. So
sure,
hadn't had that aha moment.
Okay. So you have 10 acres here, from what I understand, and is most of it managed, as you would say, or do you let some of it kind of do its natural thing?
All of it is managed in terms of keeping those invasives out.
Okay.
We have areas that we consider meadow, and we're trying to reforest most of it. So there's those very large-scale management plans. But most of our active management is to keep the invasives out and then let the other stuff happen. So the meadow now is being encroached by a lot of the woodies that are coming in. So I have to decide, do we really want to keep a meadow or not? And I think the answer is yes, we do. The most diverse landscape is a mosaic of forest, actually old forest, young forest, meadow, and then some kind of wetland. And we have what we call the holler here. It's a little stream. It goes down to a low area. So that's going to stay a little wetland.
So you have a lot of different ecosystems on your property.
We really do. We really do.
So it sounds to me like you kind of became what is now your target audience for your writing, correct?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. And that creates, I mean, people say I'm an authority. I'm only an authority in that I have done it and I see that it works. It's, I'm not making this up. It's enormously rewarding to see all of the life that comes around you. When we moved, we used to have a television. We were normal people. I haven't even hooked it up.
Really?
And it's 13 years.
That's fantastic.
Because we're outside every chance we get, because that's where the entertainment is. It is really entertaining.
You were pointing out some of the different caterpillars that are present on your leaves. Have you ever done a count just to see how many Lepidoptera you have
How many
here?
species?
Yes.
No, I haven't.
It sounds like a good
I should, yeah.
research project for a student.
Yeah. We're talking about hundreds of species.
Hundreds
of species, yeah.
Wow. And how many?
Today, I could in a half an hour, I could probably find 25 species.
Wow.
No trouble at all.
In the state of Delaware, where you live, approximately how many Lepidoptera species are there?
How about if I say the Mid-Atlantic states, because I know that answer.
Sure.
3,000.
3,000.
3,000 in the Mid-Atlantic states. There are about 15,000 nationwide.
Okay.
Only about 11,400 of those are recorded as being here. So there's still a number that remain to be discovered. I spent a week with Dave Wagner in Arizona in August, and he is really Mr. Lepidoptera. He wrote the book. He's writing a book on caterpillars of Western North America. So these are his numbers, and I said, "What are you going to do after you finish this?" He said, "I'm never going to finish this. There are just too many."
Lifetime work.
I mean, we were there one week, and we discovered. I mean, I took pictures of things that had never been photographed and things that he was looking for but had never found, and it was really exciting.
Are most of our butterfly skippers and moths very particular about their host plants when they're in caterpillar stage? I mean, how many species typically does a caterpillar actually eat?
90% of the Lepidoptera that are out there are extremely host specific, and there's more and more data really bolstering that figure, coming in from North America, from Central America, from the tropics. It's a really robust figure. So specialization is what they do. Now, what does specialization mean? Often it's on a genus of plant.
Okay, so not necessarily the particular species.
Not that happens, and sometimes there's specialization within a particular plant. For example, there are caterpillars that can only eat young foliage. If it gets old, they will die.
Oh,
and
that's
it's the same plant.
That's. Do you have an example of that?
No,
okay,
no.
we'll look that up.
Yeah, that's another day.
So most gardeners, most homeowners don't really realize that the caterpillars of butterflies don't eat nectar; they actually eat leaves, and that's kind of a revelation that you've helped explain to the world.
Right. Well, the next question they have is, why do we need caterpillars? Who cares about caterpillars? Everybody worries about pollinators, and we certainly need pollinators. 80% of our plants rely on pollinators. But why do we need those caterpillars? Because they are vital components of the terrestrial food webs. So many things eat caterpillars. And I'll just focus on birds.
Yes.
96% of the birds rear their young on insects, and most of those are rearing their young on caterpillars.
It's amazing.
So you take away the caterpillars, you end reproduction in the vast majority of our birds. Nobody wants that to happen, and that's just birds. Something like the red fox, 25% of its diet is insects.
Wow.
Nobody thinks about that.
It's incredible.
So insects are delivering protein from plants to an awful lot of creatures that themselves are part of the food web. You take away insects, and everything collapses. And unfortunately, the way we have gardened, which has been just for aesthetics, plants have become decorations instead of functioning units of the landscape, has encouraged that. We've picked plants that are pest-free, meaning nothing can eat them. They're almost always from Asia or from Europe. which means our insects haven't co-evolved with them. They don't have the adaptations to be able to get around those defenses. So for example, our poor monarch is in terrible trouble this year, down 90%. It's a specialist on milkweed. It can eat all the milkweeds. But if you take away milkweed and plant eucalyptus, that's it for the monarch. And they say, well, let them adapt. No, they disappear first.
It also, I know it's very troubling that some plants like black swallowwort, which are in that same family, are attracting monarch caterpillars and basically are toxic to them.
Well, they're attracting the ovipositing female.
Okay.
She smells milkweed, lays her egg on it. She's never encountered this plant before in her evolutionary history. But the plant has volatiles that are, meet her criteria for a good plant to lay an egg on, and she does. And the egg hatches, and the caterpillar is poisoned to death.
Wow.
Yep.
another great example of why not to plant invasive plants.
Yes. They're replacing the native plant communities that support these food webs. So we either do that actively in our yards, or we do that in our yards and then they leave our yards. So 85% of the invasive woody plants in this country are escapees from our gardens.
85%
of the woody plants.
Introduced through horticulture.
Exactly.
Wow.
And we're still doing it.
Yes.
We're still selling miscanthus. We're still selling autumn olive.
Well, I saw some burning bush on the way here. One of your neighbors.
Top seller.
Yeah.
You saw a whole row of it. And what do? I spend my days pulling it out.
Right.
I've got crown vetch everywhere that has come in from the ranch over there because they had to stabilize the soil, as if we couldn't do that with a native. So,
I think one obstacle to have more environmental gardening is people seem to be afraid of insects. And do you encounter that with any students that you have? I mean, obviously, if in your classes, they must have some
there's a little bit of a filter before they get to our department. But sure, we've demonized nature. Everything out there is going to hurt you in some respect. So that's certainly true with stinging insects. I've had schools call me up and say, we want to put natives in our yard, but nothing that makes a flower.
Oops.
So, a lot of plants have flowers.
Right.
We don't want any bees around.
No bees.
And what they don't realize, the funny thing is, if they just have lawn, they almost certainly have clover. And that's going to cause more bee stings than anything else, because the kids step on it by accident.
And it's not native, unfortunately.
And it's not native. But either are the honeybees that they're stepping on.
That's true. But they are the only ones that produce surplus honey, so I guess we
our risk assessment is so twisted. I think I could give you all kinds of crazy stats.
Go for it.
1,500 infants have TVs fall on them every year.
1,500
1,500, because the flat screens are top heavy and they pull them down. I don't know how many of those are fatal, but nobody wants a TV on their child, and yet we worry about them going outside. 45,000 deaths from car accidents, 370 people killed by toasters every year. Those are the things we should be worrying about, not snakes or Mississippi has, I think, 7 species of poisonous snakes, and there's not a single record of a poisonous snake death in Mississippi.
Now, do you find that your students are really gung-ho now? They've heard you in class. Do you think they're the ones that are going to change our world? I mean...
yes. I have a slide in my talk of my grandson, Oscar. He's eating lunch, but he's actually reading a book about wildlife sounds, and his elbow is right in his sandwich, and he's got peanut butter smear, because he is so intense on learning about these
he's been around you.
Wildlife sounds. Not really. He lives in Alaska.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But it's a good example. People say, well, there's the solution. And it is, except we can't wait that long.
Right. So
we can't wait for Oscar. We can't wait for my students. It has to start with our generation. We have to do it quickly, because the real connection that everybody needs to understand is that biodiversity creates functioning ecosystems. So without the animals to run those ecosystems, they don't function. If they don't function, they're not making those ecosystem services that keep humans alive.
Right.
Just to be selfish about it, we need to keep nature cranking along. And in the past, we've relied on natural areas to do that. Look at that night map of the U.S. with all the lights on. There's not enough natural areas left out there. We have to do it at home now.
I think you've struck on a really interesting point, which is most people don't really understand what ecosystem services are, but those are things in our environment that support us in some way, shape, or form. And gardening to provide those ecosystem services is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, let's just talk a simple one like clean water. We all need clean water. We get that. And what do? We have 92% lawn in our typical suburban neighborhood.
92% lawn.
That's in
wow. Even around here.
That's where we measured it, yeah, in
wow.
Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. So 92% lawn. Lawn makes dirty water. And it doesn't encourage, particularly in the summertime, you get that thunderstorm and the ground is baked, that water runs off. And it carries that fertilizer and herbicide
right.
and everything else with it right into the Chesapeake Bay. We need to encourage infiltration. So that's where those flower beds and those plantings come in. 92% lawn means there's very few plants in our lives. So we need to put the plants back. Those plants are sequestering carbon. If you picked one ecosystem service we need to be doing real fast,
yes, that's
it's sequestering carbon. It's not going to be a Bradford pear that lives 30 years and then falls over and releases all the carbon it just sequestered. It's got to be long-lived oaks and other things that are going to hold it for at least 100 years till we can figure out how to do this on a long-term basis. And we only have 10% of the trees in our yards that could be there compared to what's in a woodlot.
Okay.
So if we up that to 50%, that'd be great.
Huge
difference. If we shrunk the lawn, cut it in half, we're not going to get rid of it, but it's a status symbol. We are destroying ecosystem services for a status symbol. It's not a good
nature,
reason.
essentially.
Yeah.
Now, I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak multiple times, and I know your favorite tree ecologically is the oak. So tell us a little bit about why oaks are your favorite.
Lots of reasons. It's funny, I grew up liking oaks, and I couldn't have told you why then. They were big trees, fun to climb. I don't know, I like oaks, but once I started measuring things, and I found out that was a good one to like. So for example, if we want to make caterpillars so that we can make bird food, just think of them as bird food, there is no tree that is better at doing that. They support 557 species of caterpillars.
Catch that, folks, 557
now
species.
compare that to a ginkgo.
Okay.
That we plant ornamentally.
Yep.
They support 3.
Wow.
None of which I've ever seen, by the way. Okay, so you go to a ginkgo tree and there's nothing on it. Same with the crepe myrtle. There's nothing on these trees from someplace else. So huge difference there. Oaks, there is no better tree for sequestering carbon. They're enormous. They hold tons and tons and tons of it, and they hold it for a long time. Great. Put them in. And a lot of people say, well, I can't plant an oak because I'm not going to live long enough to enjoy it. I talk about enjoying them as oak bushes. Then you have instant gratification. But, I don't know if you can see this. That's a willow oak behind us. It's not gigantic. I planted it from an acorn, and it's 13 years old.
Wow. And
I will show you a white oak out front that is also 13 years old.
Wow.
It's bigger than that.
You've got at least, what you would say, a 20-foot tree there?
Sure.
Yeah, 13 years, so we all can do this.
They grow. They do grow.
Yep. What are some of the things that you think a homeowner can start doing immediately in their landscape to make it more ecologically beneficial?
The most important thing they can do right away is to think of ways to reduce the area that's in lawn.
Okay.
And replace that area with plants. Because that will increase ecosystem services immediately. The more productive you make those plants, the more you're going to help wildlife around you. So how do you do that? You first, expand your flower beds, plant trees where you don't have them. You can do it in formal ways. You can do it in informal ways. It depends on where you are and what the social pressure around you is. But we can change what the status symbol is very quickly. And it's already happened in some areas. For example, Tucson, Arizona, they used to have green lawns just like we did. But it took a ton of water that they didn't have to make them green. So they don't have enough water. Everybody gets it. Now if you have the green law, you're breaking the law. You're the social pariah. Exactly. And that happened almost overnight. So now xeriscaping is it, and everybody's accepted it, and that's where they live. They live in a desert. You got to plant like a desert. So accept the biome you're in. And when I fly into Denver, it looks like Philadelphia because everybody has taken eastern trees and planted them there.
Right.
They don't have the water to support that in a sustainable way. So accept the biome you live in. And if you hate it, move someplace else.
And use originally native plants. as much as possible?
Sure. You know, I'm not going to be you don't have to be a purist. You want to build the, what I call the, you know, the background, the backbone of your landscape out of those native plants. The woody plants, the structural plants that are going to form those outdoor rooms, they should be native. Woody plants are more productive than herbaceous plants in supporting life. So the more of your woody background plants that you can have native, the better off you're going to be. You know, if you absolutely need that crepe myrtle for an accent, or you love it, or you're from South Carolina, great. But when everything is a crepe myrtle, we've got a problem. When you get to your perennials, your annuals and perennials, that's where most people do most of their creative gardening. There's a lot of beautiful natives there, but there's a lot of beautiful other plants too, for sure.
Right.
So, you know, they play around with that. But, you know, unless you want to see the monarch disappear in the next 5 years, put some milkweed in.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to happen. You know, they're down 90% at this point.
Yes.
And the place they're going to be saved is in our gardens. It's not going to happen in agriculture.
And the monarch's been kind of the poster child for the suffering butterflies, but there are a lot of other species, as I read, that are endangered too.
Of course. The monarch is the most iconic insect in the world, and we're watching it disappear. But as you say, all those insects we're not following.
Right.
Many of them are in trouble too, and we don't even know it. We didn't even know it.
Now, I've heard you, one of your presentations, talk about a butterfly that was essentially saved through residential landscaping.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
That's the Atala butterfly in South Florida. It's a beautiful little lycaenid black and orange butterfly, and the larva is beautiful too. It feeds on a native cycad called kunti that used to be used for food by the Seminole Indians. They pounded the root for starch.
Okay.
And
like a yucca kind of thing, or even?
You know, it's a cycad, so
okay, we'll have to take a look.
Yeah, it's not sharp, pointy.
Okay.
But it's a low-growing evergreen shrub that does well in the sandy soils of southern Florida. When the settlers came, the Seminoles taught them about this source of starch, and the settlers loved it, and they ate all the kunti. So, of course, the butterfly is a specialist. That's the only thing it eats.
Okay.
So when the kunti disappeared from the wild, so did the Atala. And then we came up with the endangered species list in the 70s, and people wanted to list it as endangered, but they couldn't find any. And that's one of the rules. You have to have something before you can save it. So instead they listed it as extinct.
Oh, gosh.
Well, at the same time, the landscaping industry discovered kunti as an effective landscaping plant. And there were a few plants left in gardens here and there. So they started to promote it, and it wasn't long before everybody in South Florida has kunti in their yards. And the Atala showed up again.
Wow.
Nobody knows where it came from. Maybe there was a population in the Everglades that they didn't know about. But and it's relatively common in South Florida now.
So that's
as a matter of fact, there are people who are asking extension agents, "There's a caterpillar eating my kunti. How do I kill it?" You know. What's interesting to me about that is that it wasn't on the endangered species list. So there were no regulations restricting anybody. Not one dime of conservation money was spent. We simply changed the way we landscape with one species of plant, and we saved an endangered species. You know, did we save it forever? It depends on how we landscape, but it's now got good populations in lots of places in southern Florida, and it's a beautiful thing. If we can do that by accident, think what we could do if we tried, if that was a goal.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
Now, some people have a concern when they find an eaten leaf or a partially eaten leaf, and you know, I always encourage people to think about how small that little bit is. By and large, how much does a caterpillar eat during its time as a caterpillar?
Spicebush swallowtail. I've got figures for this.
Sure, I bet
and
you
there's
do.
one sitting in my spicebush right over there.
We could take a look. Absolutely.
It requires 3 spicebush leaves to become an adult.
3 spicebush leaves.
Right.
So all of us can afford 3 spicebush leaves.
Can you afford 3 spicebush leaves?
Lindera-benzoin.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so is that pretty typical, you think, of most?
Right. Now, there are some species that lay their eggs gregariously. So the female will put all her eggs in one basket. They hatch, and you get 100 caterpillars.
Okay.
So 100 times 3 is then 300 leaves, and they can strip a branch. And this is the time of year where that can happen. Does it typically hurt the tree? Almost never.
Well,
what people are thinking about are the gypsy moth.
Yes.
And the Japanese beetles, the insects we've brought in from someplace else. And they don't have a complex of natural enemies. And that's what we were watching before you came out. They're saddleback caterpillars. and the parasites were emerging from its back. They'll spin a little cocoon. I haven't found a saddleback this August that has not been parasitized.
Really?
I'm trying to rear one through to get a picture of the adult, and I haven't been able to do it yet. Every single one has been parasitized. So most of those caterpillars are controlled by higher trophic levels,
right.
or they're eaten by birds. So you know, a chickadee
yes.
takes between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to make one clutch of babies, bring them to maturity.
So it's really nature. It's about nature and balance. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Not eliminating pests and problems, but tolerating some limited damage.
Right. We've put that word pest on there because of this notion that our plants are decorations and they have to be perfect.
Yes.
You know, if you want it to be perfect, put a plastic plant in. Nothing's going to eat it, and it'll contribute just as much as your other ones.
In the presentation I heard you give recently, you made a very compelling argument to view exotic ornamental plants as ornaments, as sculptures, and to view them that way. I thought that was a very powerful message. Yeah. That ecologically they really don't have much to offer. Particularly in terms of food web.
Now, whether the plant is from this country or Asia, it still is photosynthesizing.
Right.
It's making food, but if it doesn't pass it on,
selfish plants.
Yeah, then so maybe it's sequestering some carbon and holding water in place. But in terms of food webs, it's inert. So yeah, like a statue. It could be beautiful, and then I show a picture. How many statues do you want in your yard? Right.
It's a very powerful message, and I think most people haven't really thought of their landscapes in that way.
Well, that's good. They always laugh. I didn't know they were getting that.
No, people are getting that message.
Okay.
Now, if I can ask you, I'd like to about the book that you've just finished, right, and is coming out this spring. Can you tell us a little bit about that without annoying your publisher?
Oh no, my publisher would be happy.
Okay. Don't want to give up any secrets, but we'd love to hear.
Right. This is a collaboration with Rick Dark, and it's actually 2/3 Rick's and 1/3 mine. I like to talk about it as Rick's book that I helped with. Right. It takes the message of bringing nature home, which is we need to do this, and gives some concrete arguments. And it's not a how-to book, but it does talk a whole lot about how you can create layers in your landscape, why you need to create those layers, what effective ways can you bring more plants into your landscape without it being wild and messy. And it's not 100% native either. So it shows how can you create that balance in your yard. And Rick he just has a marvelous eye for how to do this. I don't. Okay. So you know, his photographs tell a zillion stories.
Well, this concept of layers, I think also we've kind of ignored in our landscapes. A typical suburban landscape is tall trees and flat grass without very much in between, and you know, preaching to the choir, but the Northeast, lots of Mid-Atlantic and into the Midwest, we have natural forests that would occur. So talk a little bit about what happens in those layers, those ecotones, as it were. I know that they're very high value in our environment.
There are important components of biodiversity in every layer that's out there. So you start with the canopy, then there's a subcanopy, then there's an understory, then there's a shrub layer, then there's
even a subshrub, perhaps, right?
Well, then there's the ground layer.
Herbaceous.
Then there's the forest floor, which ought to be leaf litter. And then there's a subterranean community, which we don't go into a whole lot, but it's vitally important in terms of turning over nutrients and nourishing those plants. All of those things are happening in those layers. And if you take away any one of those layers, particularly if you take away, you know, if you have lawn, you've taken away everything all the way up to the canopy, or if there's no tree, all the way up to heaven. So you've eliminated the option for all of those different layers.
Well, I can see from your landscape you believe in layers, and it shows, because the life in this landscape is enormous. So can we take a walk and take a look at some of the things that are living in your yard along with you?